You're worth $20 million and you're letting your own flesh and blood drown in debt? My mother's voice shrieked across my marble kitchen island, slamming down a wrinkled, handwritten piece of paper. It wasn't an apology for abandoning me 7 years ago when I was broke and starving. It was a bill. An itemized invoice totaling $850,000 for the cost of raising me. My father stood behind her, nodding coldly, expecting me to break, to cry, to pull out my checkbook like I always used to. They thought they had trapped me. They thought my success belonged to them. But they didn't know I had spent the last 48 hours uncovering their real plot. I didn't yell. I didn't shed a single tear. Instead, I calmly reached into my briefcase and pulled out a sleek black leather ledger. "You brought a list of what you think I owe you," I said, my voice ice cold as I flipped it open, exposing the printed group chats that proved their true intentions. "But I brought the receipts of what you actually did. To understand why my mother was standing in my kitchen demanding nearly $1 million, you have to understand the rulebook I grew up with. In my family, love wasn't something you felt. It was something you financed. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, treated affection like a high-yield savings account. If you weren't depositing something they could use, your balance was zero. I was the eldest of two. My younger brother, Julian, was their golden child. He was charming, reckless, and deeply irresponsible, the kind of kid who could crash a car and somehow make my parents apologize to him for the tree being in the way. I, on the other hand, was the hyper-responsible fixer. From the age of 12, I was managing the family's digital calendars, balancing my father's erratic small business invoices, and ensuring the household ran like a clock. I didn't do it because I loved spreadsheet data. I did it because I quickly realized that my usefulness was the only thing protecting me from their cold indifference. "You have a head for numbers, Chloe," my father would say, tracking his thumb down a ledger at our dining room table while my mother poured expensive wine into crystal glasses they couldn't afford. "That means you carry the weight. Julian has a creative soul. He needs room to breathe. You need to make sure the foundation doesn't crack." What that translated to in reality was simple. Julian spent and I accounted for it. When Julian wanted to attend an elite out-of-state private art academy that cost $40,000 a year, my parents didn't hesitate. They took out a second mortgage on our modest suburban home. But when I earned admission to a top-tier financial engineering program a year later, my mother sat me down at that same dining table, a calculating look in her eyes. "We simply don't have the liquidity, Chloe," she said, tapping her manicured nails against the wood. "We've poured everything into your brother's future. Besides, you're smart. You can figure out how to pay your own way. It'll build character. A real woman doesn't expect handouts." So I built character. I worked 3 jobs while maintaining a grueling 19-credit-hour semester. I was working the night shift as an operations clerk at a commercial trucking firm, mapping routes and managing fuel expenditure logs until 4 a.m., then sprinting across town to sit in an advanced microeconomics lecture at 8 a.m. I lived on instant noodles, black coffee, and a persistent low-grade terror that my bank account would hit single digits before my next paycheck cleared. During those college years, my family only called me for 2 reasons: when the home Wi-Fi crashed or when my father needed me to remotely audit his business taxes because he refused to pay a professional CPA. I was their unpaid corporate consultant, their tech support, and their insurance policy. The breaking point, the moment the illusion of our family unit completely shattered, happened during the winter of my senior year. The exhaustion finally caught up with me. I fell asleep at the wheel of my beaten-down 10-year-old sedan while driving home from a 14-hour double shift at the trucking depot. The car veered off the slick, icy road and smashed directly into a concrete utility pole. The impact crushed the front frame, shattered my collarbone, fractured 3 ribs, and left me pinned under the dashboard for 45 minutes until the emergency crews could cut me out with the jaws of life. I woke up in a sterile white hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor echoing in my ears, and an excruciating burning pain radiating through my chest. The nurse informed me that I had been unconscious for 12 hours. With my one functional arm, I reached for my phone on the bedside table. My vision was blurry from the painkillers, but I managed to call my mother. I didn't want money. I didn't want a handout. I just wanted my parents to sit beside my bed. I wanted to feel, just once, like my life mattered to them outside of what I could execute on a computer screen. The phone rang 4 times before my mother picked up. "Chloe? What is it?" "Your father and I are right in the middle of dinner with Julian's new gallery curator." Her voice rushed through the receiver, sharp and annoyed. "Mom," I croaked, my throat dry and raspy. "I was in a bad accident. I'm at St. Jude's Hospital. My collarbone is broken and my car is completely totaled." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I expected a gasp. I expected her to ask if I was okay, or tell me they were getting in the car right away. Instead, I heard the faint clinking of silverware and the low murmur of laughter from a high-end restaurant in the background. "Well," my mother finally said, her voice dropping into a cold, transactional tone. "Did you have insurance on the car?" "Just liability, Mom. It won't cover a replacement." I heard her sigh deeply, a sound laced with profound irritation. "Chloe, honestly, how could you be so careless? You know your father's business is in a tight spot this quarter, and Julian's exhibition costs are astronomical. If you're calling us looking for a loan for a new vehicle or to cover your medical deductibles, you can forget it. We told you before. You are an adult and you have to manage your own liabilities. We cannot let your poor planning drag this entire family down." "Mom, I'm not asking for money," I whispered, tears finally stinging my eyes, hot and humiliating. "I'm in the hospital. I'm alone. You're in the hands of professionals, Chloe. There's nothing we can do from a hospital waiting room anyway except lose a night of sleep. Call us when you get discharged. And please don't call your father right now. He's already stressed enough about the market." The line went dead. She hung up on me. I sat in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sterile mechanical hum of the machines around me. The emotional pain completely eclipsed the physical agony of my fractured ribs. In that quiet, freezing room, a switch flipped inside my mind. The conditioning, the guilt, the desperate desire to please them, it all evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as an asset with high maintenance costs and low immediate yield. When I was discharged 3 days later, I didn't go back to their house. I didn't call them. I took an Uber straight to my damp, cramped basement apartment, bound my own chest tightly with medical wrap and sat down at my desk. I took out a simple notebook. On the first page I wrote down a number, $0. That was exactly what I owed them, and that was exactly what they were going to get from me for the rest of my life. I threw myself into my work with a feral, calculated intensity. I graduated at the top of my class, taking my exams while heavily medicated for pain. Within 2 weeks of graduation, I landed an entry-level position as an algorithmic risk analyst at a boutique private equity firm in the city. My parents didn't attend my graduation. They sent a text message 4 days later. "Congrats. Let us know when you change your streaming passwords. We can't log into the HBO account." I didn't reply. I just changed the password, blocked their numbers, and went to work. Over the next 5 years, my life became a masterclass in silent stacking. While my brother Julian was bouncing from one failed parent-funded art project to another, losing thousands of their dwindling retirement dollars in the process, I was analyzing market inefficiencies. I noticed a massive systemic blind spot in how mid-sized logistics companies managed their supply chain compliance and fuel pricing risks, the exact industry I had worked in during college. Working 80-hour weeks, I quietly developed a proprietary software platform, LogiShield, that used predictive algorithms to insulate shipping firms from sudden energy market volatility. I didn't tell a soul. I didn't post about it on social media. I lived like a monk, pouring every single dollar of my salary into cloud hosting, server architecture, and patent lawyers. When I finally launched the beta version of the software, the uptake was explosive. A major regional freight conglomerate adopted it within 30 days, saving over $2 million in fuel overhead in their first quarter alone. By year 2, LogiShield was processing over $50 million in logistics transactions. Then came the acquisition offer. A major Silicon Valley tech enterprise wanted to buy my software outright to integrate it into their global enterprise suite. The closing valuation was staggering, $24 million in cash and stock options. I went from counting quarters for laundry to seeing 8 figures hit my bank account. I bought a quiet, heavily secured modern estate at the edge of the city, surrounded by towering trees and absolute privacy. I wore the same simple clothes, drove a reliable but unassuming vehicle, and kept my circle small. To the outside world, I was just another quiet tech executive. But wealth of that magnitude leaves footprints no matter how carefully you step. It started with a sudden, unusual spike in my digital footprint. One evening, sitting in my private office, my security system flagged an aggressive influx of searches on my personal data. Someone was actively tracking my public business registrations. Someone was pulling corporate filing records from the state registry. When I looked at the IP addresses scraping the corporate data, my blood ran cold. The digital trail mapped directly back to the small suburban town where I grew up. My family had found the money. 2 days later, my phone, a private, unlisted number I had only given to high-level business contacts, buzzed on my desk. It was an unknown number, but the area code was instantly recognizable. I picked it up, keeping my breath steady. "Chloe? Oh my God, Chloe, is that really you?" My mother's voice flooded the line, but the sharp, icy irritation from 7 years ago was entirely gone. It was replaced by a breathless, honey-sweet warmth that made my stomach turn. "We've been looking for you for so long, sweetheart. You just vanished from our lives. Your father and I have been utterly heartbroken. We cry about it almost every night." I leaned back in my leather chair, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling lawn of my estate. I didn't say a word. I just listened to her perform. "Julian found your business article online," she continued, her voice trembling with a terrifyingly manufactured maternal pride. $20 million. Chloe, we always knew you were a genius. We always told everyone you were going to do incredible things. And thank God you did, because, oh, Chloe, things have been so terrible here. Your father's business went under, and the bank is threatening to foreclose on the house. We're facing absolute ruin. But then we saw your success and we knew our girl wouldn't leave his family to starve." She paused, waiting for me to comfort her. Waiting for the hyper-responsible fixer to step in and solve the problem, just like I had been trained to do since childhood. "How did you get this number, Eleanor?" I asked calmly, using her first name. I heard her gasp slightly on the other end. "Eleanor? Chloe, I am your mother. And we got your number because family always finds a way when there's love. We're actually driving into the city right now. We're coming to see your beautiful new home. We'll be there in an hour. We need to sit down, put the past behind us, and figure out how we're going to handle this financial situation together." "Do not come to my house," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Oh, don't be silly, darling. We're family. We'll see you soon." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. They thought they could execute a classic ambush. They thought the old psychological triggers, the manufactured guilt, the weaponized tears, the appeal to shared blood, would force my wallet open. They thought I was still that bleeding girl in the hospital bed, desperate for a crumb of their validation. But they didn't realize I wasn't just a fixer anymore. I was a risk analyst. And I had spent the last 48 hours building a counter-strategy that would ensure they never, ever looked at me as a financial mark again. 10 minutes after the call ended, my personal assistant flagged a secure file delivery to my email. It was an encrypted backup of an active group chat, intercepted via a security contractor I hired to monitor data leaks around my immediate family the moment I saw their IP addresses tracking my corporation. I opened the document. As I read through the text messages exchanged between my mother, my father, and my brother Julian over the last week, my hand tightened around my coffee mug until my knuckles turned stark white. The strategy they had mapped out wasn't a clumsy attempt at reconciliation. It was a cold, calculated corporate-style raid on my net worth. The group chat logs layout on my monitor was a chilling display of predatory calculation. There wasn't a single line expressing relief that I was alive, or regret for how they had abandoned me in that hospital room years ago. Instead, the messages read like a board of directors plotting a hostile takeover of a vulnerable competitor. My mother had texted Julian, "Don't worry about your gallery debts anymore. Chloe has over 20 million in liquid equity. I checked the state registries. We just have to play on her old guilt." He's soft. "She's always desperate to fix things for us." My father had replied, "Layer it. Make it look like a family investment first. Tell her we need her to manage a new property portfolio for us, then get her to sign over a monthly allocation. If she resists, we bring up the sacrifices we made to feed her when she was a child. She won't dare say no if we make a scene." And my brother, the golden child, had simply texted back, "Perfect. Make sure she buys me that studio in Soho first. She owes us for leaving us in the dark all these years anyway." Reading those words, a profound stillness settled over me. The final lingering thread of emotional obligation I didn't even know I possessed was instantly severed. I didn't feel anger. I felt an analytical detach. They were treating me like an algorithm to be cracked, a vending machine where they could insert guilt and receive a check. But they didn't realize I had rewritten my operating system. I printed out every single page of that chat log. I bound it neatly inside a heavy black leather ledger, right behind a chronological sequence of certified letters, medical bills, and bank statements dating back to the day of my accident. If they wanted to talk about finances, we were going to use real data. An hour later, the heavy gravel driveway outside my estate crunched under the tires of a vehicle. I watched through my security feed as my father's aging luxury SUV pulled up to the main entrance. My mother stepped out first, adjusting an expensive designer sunglasses frame she must have bought just for this occasion. My father smoothed down his jacket, adopting the stern authoritarian posture he used to dominate me with when I was a teenager. Julian wasn't with them. They had left the prize pony behind so the heavy hitters could secure the bag first. I didn't meet them at the door. I let them ring the bell twice before my automated security system unlocked the heavy oak panel, allowing them to step into the vaulted, minimalist foyer. "Chloe," my mother gasped, her eyes immediately darting upward to take in the brushed steel fixtures, the soaring ceilings, and the expensive modern artwork lining the walls. Her gaze didn't linger on my face for more than a second. She was too busy calculating the square footage. "Oh, look at this place. It's absolute heaven. I always knew you had impeccable taste." "Hello, Eleanor." "Richard," I said, standing at the edge of the kitchen island, my hands resting calmly on the polished stone surface. My father cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the room, trying to find an angle of leverage. "Is that any way to greet your parents, sweetheart? No hug? No welcome home? We drove 3 hours across the state to see you." "You drove 3 hours because your IP addresses flagged my corporate acquisition filing 48 hours ago," I replied, my voice flat, devoid of any inflection. My mother's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she forced it back into place, her eyes crinkling with manufactured warmth. "Oh, Chloe, always so literal, always so focused on data. Can you blame us for being curious? You walked out of our lives and became a multimillionaire without offering a single dollar to help the family that built you. But we aren't here to argue about the past. We're here to heal." She walked forward, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor, and slammed a wrinkled, handwritten piece of paper down on the marble island right in front of me. "This," she said, her voice dropping into a dramatic, trembling whisper, "is a breakdown of what it took to get you here. Since you've decided to treat your family like strangers, we decided to look at this professionally. I looked down at the paper. It was written in faded blue ink, organized in neat, aggressive bullet points. Every line item was a financial demand disguised as a parental sacrifice. 18 years of housing and utilities inflation adjustment. $320,000. Private tutoring and developmental resources. Ages 6 to 12, $85,000. Emotional labor and family guidance counseling allocation. $140,000. Unreimbursed administrative support for family tech infrastructure. $110,000. Reputational damage compensation for sudden familial abandonment. $195,000. Total liability. $850,000. $850,000, my father stated, stepping up beside her, crossing his arms over his chest. That is a conservative estimate of the foundational investment we poured into your life, Chloe. Without our shelter, without the food we put in your mouth, you wouldn't have had the brain or the opportunity to build that software. We aren't asking for all your wealth. We're simply asking for our principal investment back, plus a modest depreciation fee so we can save our home and fund your brother's next venture. It's only fair. You owe us that much. I stared at the paper for a long moment. It was a masterpiece of entitlement, a stunning display of moral inversion. They had systematically denied me financial support when I was starving, left me to rot in a hospital bed because my care didn't fit into their quarterly budget, and now they were charging me for the oxygen I breathed while growing up under their roof. You built an entire spreadsheet for my childhood, I murmured, a faint, humorless smile touching my lips. We had to, Chloe, because you clearly forgot where you came from, my mother snapped, her theatrical sweetness beginning to flake away, exposing the sharp, jagged edges of her true nature. You're sitting here in a palace worth millions while your father and I are facing bankruptcy. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is for our friends to ask why our daughter is a tech tycoon while we're buying groceries on credit? It's a public insult. We raised you to be a responsible woman. Now it's time to take responsibility for your debt. And if I say no? I asked, looking up, meeting her gaze directly. My father took a step forward, his voice dropping into a low, threatening register. Then we go to the local press, Chloe. We have journalists in our hometown who would love to write a story about the greedy tech millionaire who let his aging, broke parents get evicted from their home. We'll leak the corporate registry data. We'll show everyone exactly what kind of monster is running LogiShield. Your investors might not care about your family values, but your public reputation will take a massive hit. Think about your corporate image, Chloe. Is $850,000 really worth a public relations nightmare? They thought they had constructed the perfect trap. They had paired emotional extortion with a direct corporate blackmail threat, completely confident that my desire to protect my business and my public image would force me to sign a settlement check right then and there. They stood there, chest puffed out, waiting for the familiar collapse. Waiting for the submissive compliance they had beaten into my psyche for over 2 decades. Instead, I reached into my briefcase, pulled out the heavy black leather ledger, and placed it gently on top of my mother's handwritten invoice. The heavy thud of the book echoed in the quiet kitchen. You brought a list of what you think I owe you, I said, my voice dropping into a terrifyingly calm rhythmic cadence. But I brought a line-by-line audit of what you actually cost me. I flipped the cover open, revealing the first document. A certified copy of my university transcript paired with the itemized payment receipts from the bursar's office, showing a zero balance funded entirely by federal subsidized loans and midnight trucking pay stubs. Let's start with the investment foundation, I said, sliding the page toward my father. You listed tuition support and housing. Here is the legal proof that I financed 100% of my higher education while working 40 hours a week. You didn't contribute a single cent. In fact, during my sophomore year, you withdrew $4,000 from my personal savings account using an old joint routing number to cover Julian's spring break trip to Ibiza. That's not an investment, Richard. That's grand larceny. My father's face flushed a deep, mottled red, his mouth opening to interrupt. But I slammed my palm down on the ledger, the sound sharp like a gunshot. "I am speaking now," I said, my eyes locking onto his with an icy intensity that made him freeze in his tracks. "Do not interrupt the audit." I flipped to the next page. It was a high-resolution photocopy of the St. Jude Hospital admission report, dated 7 years ago, alongside a printed transcript of my mother's voicemail recording from that exact same evening. Section 2. Emergency Liabilities, I continued, looking directly at my mother, whose eyes had widened as she recognized the hospital letterhead. "This is the medical intake record from the night my ribs were crushed because I fell asleep from pure exhaustion. And right behind it is the audio transcript of you, Eleanor, telling me that my medical deductibles were an unacceptable drain on the family's liquidity, and that I should stop calling because you were having dinner with an art curator." The kitchen grew so silent you could hear the soft humming of the wine refrigerator in the distance. My mother's hand flew to her throat, her chest heaving as she stared at the printed evidence of her absolute cruelty. "You want $850,000 for the cost of raising me?" I whispered, leaning forward over the counter, forcing them to look at the cold reality of their choices. "You didn't raise me. You exploited me. You treated me like a line-item asset that you could underfund, overwork, and liquidate whenever Julian needed a handout. You want to go to the press? Go ahead. I have already pre-formatted a digital press release containing these exact hospital records, your group chat logs from this morning, and your itemized extortion invoice. If a single reporter contacts my corporate legal team, this file goes live to every major business outlet in the country within 5 minutes. Let's see how your local reputation survives when the world reads the exact text messages where you plotted to blackmail your own daughter for corporate equity." My mother staggered back a half step, her face completely drained of color. The arrogance, the dominance, the absolute certainty they had walked into my home with had completely evaporated. They were looking at a woman who was entirely immune to their poison. A woman who had codified their abuse into an unassailable financial brief. "Chloe." My mother stammered, her voice cracking, trying desperately to shift back into a defensive, victimized tone. We were desperate. The bank is really taking the house. We didn't mean it like that. It was just a negotiation tactic. We love you, sweetheart. We've always loved you. Save it, I said, shutting the black ledger with a decisive, heavy snap. The window for negotiation closed 7 years ago in that hospital room. You wanted a professional, transactional relationship with your daughter. You've got one. And according to my balance sheet, your account is permanently closed. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a crisp single $1 bill and slid it across the marble counter, letting it rest on top of their fraudulent invoice. "That is the absolute maximum value of your parental contribution," I said, looking at them both for the final time. "Now get out of my house before I have my private security team remove you for criminal trespass." My father stared at the dollar bill, his jaw working silently, his fists trembling with a useless, impotent rage. He looked at my face, searching for any sign of hesitation, any lingering trace of the girl he used to control. He found nothing but ice. Without another word, he grabbed my mother's arm, turning her around sharply, and marched her out of the kitchen. Their hurried, frantic footsteps echoed through the grand foyer until the heavy front oak door slammed shut behind them, the automated locks clicking into place with a definitive, permanent sound. I stood alone in my kitchen, looking out the panoramic windows as their SUV sped down my driveway, disappearing past the security gates. I felt a profound, incredible lightness wash over me. The trap had snapped shut, but it hadn't caught me. It had caught them in the reflection of their own greed. True family isn't defined by shared biology or an itemized invoice of conditional affection. True family is defined by the people who stay with you in the cold garage, the people who show up when you're broken in a hospital bed, and the people who respect the boundaries you build to protect your peace. I had built my fortune from nothing, and I was going to spend the rest of my life investing it in people who actually knew the value of love. The automated click of my estate's front gates locking behind my parents' SUV was a sound I thought would bring absolute finality. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the single-dollar bill resting on top of their wrinkled blue ink invoice. Thought it was over. I thought that by exposing their corporate-style strategy, by laying out the unassailable data of their neglect, I had built a wall so high they would never attempt to scale it again. But I had underestimated the sheer, desperate velocity of parasitic entitlement. When people view you as a financial mark rather than a human being, a rejection doesn't make them reflect. It makes them recalculate. 3 weeks passed in complete, deceptive silence. I threw myself back into my work, using the routine of data analysis and algorithmic risk management to smooth over the jagged emotional edges left by their ambush. LogiShield was scaling faster than my development teams could keep up with, and our secondary market valuation was climbing toward a projected $35 million. I was finalizing a massive partnership with a transcontinental freight conglomerate, a deal that required my absolute, undivided concentration. Then the second wave of the trap was sprung. It didn't come from my mother or my father. It came from my brother Julian. I was sitting in a quiet, low-lit coffee boutique downtown, 3 blocks away from my secondary corporate office, reviewing a series of compliance frameworks on my laptop. The cafe was mostly empty, save for the low murmur of the espresso machine and the soft rain tapping against the glass windows. Suddenly, the chair across from my small wooden table was pulled back. I looked up, my fingers freezing over my keyboard. Julian sat down. He wasn't wearing the theatrical, defensive arrogance my parents had brought to my kitchen. He looked hollowed out. His hair was messy, his designer jacket looked slightly rumpled, and his eyes were rimmed with a heavy, bloodshot exhaustion. He didn't look like the pampered golden child who had spent his entire life spending my parents' retirement money. He looked like a person who was actively drowning. "Chloe," he said, his voice cracking slightly as he reached out across the table, his hands trembling. He didn't try to grab my laptop or look at my work. He just looked at me, his eyes wide and completely desperate. "Please. Don't call security. Don't walk out. Just give me 5 minutes. I didn't come here for them. I swear to God I didn't come here for Mom and Dad." I leaned back in my chair, my analytical conditioning instantly taking over. I didn't close my laptop, but I shifted my screen slightly so it was completely obscured from his view. I kept my breathing measured, my face an absolute mask. "How did you find me, Julian?" I asked, my voice flat. "I've been sitting in my car down the street from your office building for 4 days, Chloe," he whispered, wiping a hand across his face. "I know you blocked everyone. I know what happened at your house. Mom came back completely hysterical, screaming that you were a monster, that you had threatened them with a legal team, and that you threw a single-dollar bill in her face. Dad was completely silent, he just locked himself in his study and started drinking. But I don't care about their invoice. I don't care about their debt." He leaned closer, his voice dropping into a frantic low hiss. "Chloe, they ruined me too. You got out. You built a wall and you got out. But they stayed around my neck like an anchor. Every single gallery project, every single studio space they funded for me, it wasn't a gift. It was a loan they monitored every single hour. When my last exhibition failed to sell, Dad didn't comfort me. He brought out his own ledger. He told me I owed them $60,000 for the marketing capital they invested, and that if I didn't help them get into your accounts, they were going to let the bank take my apartment and file a lawsuit against my studio. Tears began to well up in Julian's eyes, thick and heavy. He looked utterly broken, a pathetic shadow of the brother who used to mock me from the comfort of the family dining table. "They used me as bait, Chloe," Julian sobbed, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "They told me that if I could get you to meet me at a restaurant, if I could just get you to sit down with me without your security team, they could step in and make a real emotional plea. They said you always had a soft spot for me. They said you used to balance my homework and fix my mistakes when we were kids, and that you wouldn't let me go to prison or lose my life over their debts. I watched him quietly. The psychological mechanism was clear. This was the classic good cop, bad cop pivot, executed through the family dynamic. My parents had failed with overt aggression and legal blackmail, so now they were deploying the emotional vulnerability of the golden child. They were trying to trigger my old conditioning as the family fixer. The sister who would sacrifice her own peace to make sure her little brother didn't suffer the consequences of his own actions. "You're asking me to save you from them," I stated, my voice completely steady. "I'm asking you to help me run away from them, Chloe," Julian pleaded, looking up, his face streaked with tears. "I don't want $20 million. I just need enough to pay off the immediate studio back rent so the marshals don't seize my equipment, and a ticket out of the state. $10,000. That's nothing to you now. It's pocket change. If you give me that, I'll sign any non-disclosure agreement your lawyers want. I'll change my name. I'll never speak to Mom and Dad again. I'll vanish just like you did. Please, Chloe. You're the only one in this world who actually knows how to solve a crisis. Don't leave me alone in that house with them." It was an elite performance. It tapped into every deep evolutionary instinct of sibling protection. For a split second, a tiny, buried fraction of my mind wondered if he was telling the truth. I wondered if Julian was truly just another casualty of Richard and Eleanor's toxic financial algorithms. But I didn't build a multi-million-dollar software empire by trusting emotional narratives. I built it by verifying the source code. "Leave your phone on the table, Julian," I said calmly, "and go to the counter to get us 2 coffees. He blinked, startled by the instruction. "What?" "If you want me to consider transferring $10,000 to your account, I need a few minutes to review my capital allocations without you staring at my screen," I said, my voice dropping into a firm, authoritative tone. "And I don't want your phone buzzing or distracting me while I perform the transfer logic. Leave it face down on the table, go order the drinks, and don't come back until the barista calls your name." Julian hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting to his phone, then back to my face. He saw the cold, immovable wall of my expression and realized he had no leverage. He nodded quickly, wiping his face again. Fine. Thank you, Chloe. Thank you for just listening," he muttered, sliding his sleek black smartphone onto the wooden surface face down, before sliding out of the booth and walking toward the coffee counter across the room. The moment his back was turned, I didn't touch my bank application. I reached across the table, picked up his phone, and tapped the screen. It was locked with a standard 6-digit passcode. I didn't need a high-end hacking tool to open it. I knew my brother. I knew his psychology. He had used the exact same numerical sequence for his bike locks, his email accounts, and his gym locker since he was 15 years old. The birth date of his favorite childhood dog. I punched in the numbers. The phone clicked open instantly. I skipped past his social media apps and went straight to his secure messaging applications. I clicked on the primary group chat pinned at the top of his inbox, the one labeled Family Core. The last messages had been sent exactly 22 minutes ago, while Julian was sitting in his car watching me through the cafe window. My mother had texted, "He's in the boutique cafe on 4th Street. He just walked in alone with his laptop. Julian, go in now. Remember the script. Do not ask for big figures. Play the victim. Tell him we are threatening you. Tell him you need exactly $10,000 for the studio. Once he links his corporate account to your routing number for the small transfer, our legal contractor can flag the account linkage for the asset concealment filing. Go, go, go." My father had added, "Make sure you cry, Julian. He always cracks when you look pathetic. If he gives you the 10 grand, take the transaction receipt screen cap immediately. We need proof of an active, ongoing financial relationship to present to the probate court next week. If he gives you even $1, he legally acknowledges his ongoing obligation to support the immediate family unit under the state dependency guidelines. Do not screw this up. This is our only shot to pierce his corporate shield." Julian's own text sent right before he stepped out of his vehicle read, "I'm going in. Keep the engine running. If she buys the sob story, we'll have her bank details by noon." I stared at the screen, my heart beating at a perfectly rhythmic, uninterrupted pace. I didn't feel a single surge of adrenaline. I didn't feel the burning sting of betrayal. I felt the profound, absolute satisfaction of an engineer who had just detected a predictable, amateurish piece of malware before it could execute on the main server. They hadn't sent a broken brother looking for salvation. They had sent an operational reconnaissance scout carrying a digital wire. They were trying to trick me into a small $10,000 electronic transfer so they could use the transaction metadata to prove a pattern of familial financial support in a corrupt small-town probate court, effectively breaking the corporate liability walls I had spent years constructing around LogiShield. They were treating my survival like a legal loophole to be exploited. I looked across the cafe. Julian was standing by the pickup counter, his back still turned, casually chatting with the barista, his broken, sobbing posture completely gone the moment he thought he was out of my line of sight. He was smiling, running a hand through his hair, completely confident that his performance had cracked my armor. I slowly lowered his phone back onto the table, face down in the exact millimeter position he had left it. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I quietly opened a secure, encrypted terminal window on my laptop. I connected to my corporate security network and initiated a high-level digital counterstrike. If my family wanted to use financial transactions and legal frameworks to play a game of corporate warfare, I was going to show them what an actual institutional audit looked like. I pulled up the state business registration for my father's failed commercial enterprise, the one he claimed had gone under due to market conditions. I ran a quick cross-reference check through a public record debt database that my private equity firm retained access to. Within 90 seconds, the data revealed the truth. My father hadn't gone under legally. He had systematically routed his business revenues into an offshore shell account registered under my mother's maiden name to avoid paying federal payroll taxes for his 3 remaining employees, then filed a fraudulent corporate insolvency petition to wipe out his local bank debts. It was a blatant, unvarnished piece of corporate tax fraud. And they had left a massive digital paper trail right in the state's public registries, assuming nobody would ever have the financial engineering expertise to connect the routing codes. I compiled the entire data package, the state registration discrepancies, the offshore routing numbers, the group chat screenshots from Julian's phone showing their active conspiracy to commit legal fraud, and the itemized extortion invoice my mother had signed and left on my kitchen counter. I compressed the file into a secure read-only PDF document. I labeled the file, Exhibit A, Systemic Financial Fraud and Compliance Violations, Richard and Eleanor Profile. Just as I clicked the final encryption lock on the document, Julian walked back to the table, carrying 2 steaming porcelain cups of black coffee. He sat down, sliding one toward me, his face instantly melting back into that pathetic, wide-eyed look of desperate vulnerability. "The barista said it's a fresh roast," Julian said softly, his voice trembling on cue. "So, what do you think, Chloe? Can you help me? Can you give me a chance to get away from them? I just need the $10,000 to clear the account. I swear you'll never hear from me again." I looked at him for a long, quiet moment. I didn't touch the coffee cup. I closed my laptop with a soft, deliberate click. "I opened your phone while you were at the counter, Julian," I said, my voice completely clear, echoing slightly in the quiet boutique. Julian froze. The manufactured color in his face drained away in an instant. His eyes darted down to his phone, then snapped back up to my face, his lips parting in panic. "What? Chloe, that's an invasion of my privacy. Why would you?" "I read the family core group chat," I interrupted, leaning forward, my eyes locking onto his with a terrifying, absolute stillness. "I read the message Mom sent you 20 minutes ago telling you to play the victim. I read Dad's instructions telling you to capture a screenshot of the transfer receipt so they could use it in probate court to pierce my corporate asset shield. And I read your reply, telling them to keep the engine running because you'd have my bank details by noon. Julian sat completely paralyzed, his breath catching in his throat. The coffee cup in his hand shook so violently that dark liquid sloshed over the rim, staining the clean white wood of the table. He looked like an amateur gambler who had just realized he was playing against the casino owner. Chloe, they forced me. He stammered, his voice dropping the theatrical weight and turning high-pitched, raw with genuine terror. You don't understand what they're like at the house. No, Julian, you don't understand who you're dealing with, I said, my voice dropping into an ice-cold whisper that cut through his excuses like a razor blade. You thought I was the old Chloe. You thought I was the tired girl who used to clean up your messes and pay your bills just to keep the peace. But that girl died in a hospital bed 7 years ago while you and our parents were having dinner with a gallery curator. I tapped the top of my laptop. Inside this machine is a fully compiled forensic financial audit of our father's business. I have the tracking data for the offshore shell account under Mom's maiden name. I have the records of the tax evasion he committed last quarter. And now, I have the digital screenshots proving that all three of you are actively conspiring to execute a fraudulent extortion scheme against a registered corporate entity. I leaned back, crossing my arms, watching him crumble. Here is what is going to happen next. You're going to pick up your phone, walk out of this cafe and get back into that SUV with our parents. You are going to tell them that the wallet is not just closed. It has been converted into a legal weapon. If I see another vehicle tracking my estate, if I receive a single phone call from an unknown number, or if a single local journalist receives a leaked document about my company, this entire forensic file goes directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. Julian's mouth worked silently, his chest heaving as the absolute magnitude of their failure crashed down on him. They hadn't just failed to catch a mark. They had handed their entire financial destruction to the one person capable of executing it flawlessly. They'll go to prison, Chloe, Julian whispered, his eyes wide with horror. The house will be gone. We'll have nothing. Then I suggest you start learning how to build character, Julian, I said, a faint razor-sharp smile touching my lips. Because according to my data, your family's credit has officially run out. I opened my laptop, tapped a single key, and watched as the encrypted files were automatically routed to a secure, external server managed by my corporate legal counsel, ready to be deployed at a millisecond's notice if they ever stepped out of line again. Now, I said, looking out the window at the rain, get out of my sight. Julian didn't say another word. He grabbed his phone off the table with a trembling hand, stumbled out of the booth so quickly he nearly knocked his chair over, and sprinted out of the cafe into the pouring rain. Through the glass, I watched him climb into the back seat of the waiting luxury SUV down the street. A moment later, the brake lights flashed and the vehicle sped away into the gray afternoon, retreating back to the small town they would never leave. I sat in the quiet boutique, picked up my warm coffee and took a slow, deliberate sip. The trap had been dismantled, the parasites had been catalogued, and the final line in the sand had been drawn with absolute corporate precision. The following months brought a quiet, clinical peace that I hadn't experienced since childhood. Logie Shield finalized its enterprise merger, cementing its market cap and officially locking in my financial independence. I had fortified my world. My estate was secure, my corporate holdings were protected by top-tier legal defense funds, and my family had gone completely dark. The threat of an IRS forensic audit had acted like an absolute digital firewall. They knew that a single misstep, a single leaked rumor to a tabloid journalist, or a single unlisted phone call would trigger the immediate release of the tax evasion files I had compiled. For the first time in my life, the parasites were contained. Or so I thought. It was a crisp, late autumn afternoon when my corporate legal counsel, Marcus, requested an urgent video conference. I sat in my private home office, the autumn wind rattling the heavy glass panes, and clicked the accept button on my monitor. "Chloe," Marcus said, his expression unusually grim as his face filled the high-definition screen. "We have a structural anomaly. Your father, Richard, filed an emergency motion in the county probate court this morning. He isn't trying to sue you or Logishield directly. He's filed a petition for filial support defeasance under an archaic state dependency statute." I leaned back, my eyes narrowing as my analytical mind instantly began deconstructing the legal terminology. "Explain the mechanism, Marcus." "It's an old, rarely used law in their jurisdiction," Marcus explained, pulling up a document and sharing his screen. "If a parent can prove they are entirely destitute, facing immediate homelessness and medical insolvency, the court can mandate that an adult child provide a baseline monthly maintenance allocation, regardless of whether they are estranged. But here's the kicker. They didn't serve the papers to our corporate office. They filed a notice of an expedited in-person emergency injunction hearing for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. at the county courthouse. If you don't show up, the judge enters a default judgment, granting them an automatic discovery subpoena into your private bank accounts. They are trying to force you back to your old hometown, Chloe. They want a public stage." I looked at the digital copy of the petition. There it was, stamped by the clerk of courts. My father had attached copies of his foreclosure notices, medical statements detailing a chronic heart condition, and an itemized affidavit claiming that I had explicitly promised to support them before suddenly vanishing with my tech wealth. It was a complete desperate tissue of lies, a final structural attempt to pierce my asset shield using a corrupt, small-town legal venue where my family had operated for 30 years. "They think I'm going to send a junior associate to handle this," I murmured, a cold, sharp smile spreading across my face. "They're counting on it," Marcus said. "They assume you won't risk the bad press of showing up to a small-town courthouse to fight your sick, aging parents." "Clear my schedule for tomorrow, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping into a register of absolute finality. "Prepare the corporate transport. I'm going back. But I'm not bringing a legal brief. I'm bringing the entire ledger." The next morning, the sky was a heavy iron gray as my private black sedan pulled up to the stone steps of the county courthouse, the very building where I used to file my father's business licenses when I was an unpaid teenager. The air was freezing, biting at my face as I stepped out of the vehicle. I wasn't wearing the casual, quiet attire I preferred at my estate. I wore a tailored, razor-sharp charcoal corporate suit, my hair pulled back tightly, carrying a heavy black leather briefcase. I walked up the stone steps with a slow, deliberate cadence, the heels of my boots clicking against the granite like a countdown clock. When I pushed open the double oak doors of courtroom 3B, the atmosphere was thick with tension. My parents were already seated at the petitioner's table. My mother, Eleanor, was wearing a faded, oversized sweater, her eyes artfully red and tearful, holding a tissue to her nose. My father, Richard, sat slumped in his chair, leaning heavily on a wooden cane he had never used in his life, looking weak and frail. Julian sat behind them in the gallery, his head bowed, playing the role of the tragic, supportive younger brother. They had meticulously staged the scene to look like a small-town family being crushed by the unfeeling success of a cold tech tycoon daughter. Their local attorney, a slick small-town lawyer named Vance, stood up as I entered, a smug smile on his face. He expected a high-priced, arrogant city lawyer to walk in behind me. Instead, I walked down the center aisle completely alone. I didn't hire a local representative. I didn't sit at the defense table. I walked straight to the bar, placed my black briefcase down, and looked directly at the bench. The judge, a stern older man named Judge Henderson, looked down through his spectacles, shifting his papers. "Where is your legal counsel, Ms. Vance?" "Excuse me, Miss Chloe. I am representing myself Your Honor," I said, my voice echoing clearly, completely devoid of fear or hesitation. "I am the CEO and sole equity holder of the entities in question, and I require no intermediary to address this court." My mother let out a soft, theatrical sob from the table, dabbing at her eyes. Oh, Chloe, how can you look at us like we're corporate enemies? We're your mother and father. Order. Judge Henderson rapped his gavel, looking over at my parents' attorney. Mr. Vance, present your petition for emergency maintenance. Vance stepped forward, clearing his throat loudly, turning slightly to ensure the few local reporters sitting in the back gallery could hear every word. Your Honor, this is a tragic case of flagrant familial abandonment. My clients Richard and Eleanor are facing absolute ruin. Their family business has collapsed due to tragic market shifts. Their home is being foreclosed upon. Richard's health is failing rapidly. Meanwhile, their eldest daughter, Chloe, has amassed a fortune exceeding $20 million through software developed using the very resources, education, and shelter my clients sacrificed their own lives to provide. Under state statute, we are requesting an emergency temporary support order of $12,000 a month, alongside an immediate disclosure of the respondent's liquid assets to prevent further concealment. $12,000 a month, Judge Henderson repeated, looking over his glasses at me. Miss Chloe, how do you respond to the petition? Do you deny that your parents are in a state of severe financial distress? I stepped up to the podium, opening my black briefcase with a slow, deliberate click. The sound was incredibly loud in the silent courtroom. I do not deny their financial distress, Your Honor, I said, my voice cutting through the room like dry ice. What I deny is the narrative of parental sacrifice and legal entitlement. I have brought the objective data to prove that this petition is not an application for support. It is an organized attempt to execute a fraudulent, legal extortion scheme using this court as a mechanism. Objection! Vance shouted, his face reddening. This is ungrounded slander against aging, destitute parents. Overruled, Judge Henderson snapped, his curiosity piqued by my absolute, unshakable calm. Let her speak, Mr. Vance. Miss Chloe, present your evidence. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out 3 bound copies of the forensic ledger I had spent years compiling. I handed one to the bailiff to pass to the judge, slid one across to Vance, and kept the third open in front of me. Let's address Exhibit A, page 1, I stated, my voice dropping into the precise rhythmic cadence of a high-level corporate audit. The petitioners claim their family business collapsed due to tragic market conditions. If Your Honor looks at the certified transaction logs from the state registry and the corresponding bank routing codes attached, you will see that over the last 24 months, Richard systematically transferred $480,000 in corporate revenue into an offshore shell account registered under my mother's maiden name, Eleanor Vance Holdings, located in the Cayman Islands. My father's cane slipped from his hand, clattering loudly against the linoleum floor. His frail, weak posture vanished instantly as his face turned a pale, sickly white. That account, I continued without breaking stride, remains fully active and liquid. The petitioners are not destitute, Your Honor. They have actively hid nearly $500,000 from federal bankruptcy courts and their own employees' pension funds to create a manufactured narrative of poverty for this exact proceeding. This is a misinterpretation of corporate asset allocations. Vance stammered, his eyes darting frantically over the printed bank records in his hand. Let's move to Exhibit B, page 12, I said, my voice gaining volume, filling every corner of the courtroom. The petitioner, Richard, claims severe medical insolvency due to an unmanageable heart condition. If the court looks at the attached medical intake metadata from St. Jude's Hospital, dated 7 years ago, you will find a very real medical crisis. Except it wasn't his. It was mine. I was admitted with a shattered collarbone and fractured ribs after an accident caused by working 3 jobs to pay for the college education my parents refused to fund. I looked over at my mother, whose eyes were wide with a sudden, paralyzing terror. I have attached the certified audio transcript of my mother's response to my hospitalization, I said, tapping the page. where she stated that my injuries were an unacceptable drain on the family's liquidity, and told me to stop calling because they were attending an art gallery opening for my brother, Julian. For 7 years, Your Honor, I have financed 100% of my own existence, paid off my own medical liabilities, and protected my assets through independent corporate structures. The petitioners have never provided a single dollar of support. In fact, as evidenced by the banking logs on page 15, they illegally withdrew $4,000 from my student savings account using an old joint authorization code to fund a luxury vacation for my brother. Judge Henderson was leaning forward now, his jaw set, his eyes burning as he scanned the line-by-line financial data and the cold, unassailable proof of their absolute cruelty. The courtroom had become an absolute vacuum of silence. Even the local reporters in the back were frantically scribbling notes, realizing the story wasn't about a greedy millionaire. It was about a brilliant daughter dismantling her lifetime abusers in open court. And finally, I said, flipping to the last section of the ledger, my eyes locking onto Julian, who looked like he wanted to crawl under his chair. Exhibit C contains the verified messaging logs intercepted from my brother's cellular device 3 weeks ago during a premeditated ambush at a downtown cafe. In these texts, my mother explicitly instructs Julian to fake an emotional breakdown to extract a small $10,000 transfer from me, while my father states, and I quote directly from the record, "If she gives you even $1, she legally acknowledges her ongoing obligation to support the immediate family unit under the state dependency guidelines. Do not screw this up. This is our only shot to pierce her corporate shield." I shut the heavy leather ledger with a resounding, definitive thud that echoed like a gavel blow. "They did not come to this court for justice, Your Honor," I concluded, looking directly at the judge. "They came because their offshore funds are running low. My brother's art career is a complete failure, and they viewed my net worth as a loophole to be exploited through emotional extortion and legal fraud. I request not only an immediate dismissal of this petition with prejudice, but an immediate referral of these offshore banking records to the State Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division." Vance stood at his table, his mouth opening and closing silently, completely paralyzed. He looked at his clients, but Richard was staring at the floor, his hands shaking with an impotent, exposed rage, and Eleanor had buried her face in her hands, her theatrical tears turning into raw, suffocating panic. The trap hadn't just failed. It had completely inverted, exposing their lifelong corruption to the very legal system they had tried to weaponize against me. Judge Henderson stared down at my parents for a long, agonizing minute. The disgust on his face was absolute. He took his gavel, his arm moving with an immense, heavy authority. "This court has seen many cases of familial disputes," Judge Henderson said, his voice deep and booming through the chamber. "But rarely have I witnessed such a calculated, predatory, and malicious abuse of the legal system by parents against their own child. The evidence presented by the respondent is unassailable. The petition for filial support is denied with prejudice. Furthermore, this court is issuing an immediate order to freeze the assets listed in the Eleanor Vance Holdings account pending a full forensic investigation by the State Financial Crimes Unit. Mr. Vance, your clients are dismissed, and I suggest they retain criminal counsel immediately." The gavel came down. The sound was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a structural collapse, the final, definitive shattering of the chains my parents had wrapped around my neck when I was a child. My mother began to scream, her voice rising into a jagged, hysterical shriek as court bailiffs stepped forward to escort them out of the room. "Chloe, you monster. You did this to us. You're putting your own parents in prison. You owe us. You owe us everything." My father didn't look at me. He grabbed his useless wooden cane, his face twisted in a mask of bitter, defeated malice, and stumbled out the side door, flanked by Vance, who was frantically trying to pack his briefcase. Julian followed them, his face pale, looking at me with a sudden, desperate realization that the golden vault was closed forever, and he was left outside in the cold with the wreckage of his own choices. I didn't yell. I didn't smile. I didn't shed a single tear. I calmly placed my open ledger back into my black leather briefcase, zipped it shut with a smooth metallic sound and lifted it off the podium. I turned around and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. As I pushed open the double oak doors and stepped out onto the courthouse steps, the sun finally broke through the heavy iron clouds, bathing the gray stone in a bright, clean, blinding light. I stood at the top of the steps, looking out over the city I had conquered, feeling the freezing wind wash over my face. I was a millionaire, yes, but my true wealth didn't reside in the 8 figures sitting in my corporate bank accounts. My true wealth was the absolute, unassailable freedom I had built with my own hands. They had spent my entire life trying to write a bill for my existence, trying to force me to pay for the crime of being born into their calculated household. But I had rewritten the balance sheet. I had left them without a single cent, not out of cruelty but out of absolute poetic justice. True family is not defined by shared blood, last names, or an itemized invoice of conditional affection. True family is defined by the people who stand beside you in the cold garage, the people who show up when you are broken in a hospital bed, and the people who respect the boundaries you build to protect your peace. I had left the parasites behind in the dark of that courtroom, and I was stepping into the light of a future I owned completely.